Imagine waking up every single day in pain. When something as simple as turning over in bed feels like a nightmare, that was me 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was going through actually a rough time, either physically and emotionally. I was living in pain. Mornings were the worst, to be honest. And I'm quite stubborn, so I kept telling myself, that's just because of the weight that I've put on, pain from running. So I kept delaying it. I basically ignored it for a long time. Luckily, and since my wife is not here, I can say it, she's more stubborn than I am, and she forced me to go to see a doctor. So I went and took some exams, and after those exams, a couple of days after, I went to the doctor's office, one of those that you have an uncomfortable chair, posters of spines. And he was looking at the results, and eventually he said two words that would change me, two words that I've never listened to them before, two words that was the first time I got familiar with them, but they became an identity. He told me something named ankylosing spondylitis. And then he proceeded to explain that ankylosing spondylitis is a chronic rheumatic disease, autoimmune disease, that can attack my own body. Okay, so the good guys that we have inside of our body usually are there to protect you, right? On my case, sometimes they go crazy and things go wrong. So I learned about this, so I asked, what should I do? He told me that I needed to stop playing football, I need to stop running, two things that I absolutely love. Also, I have to take meds and I have to do physiotherapy. Okay, so that's it, let's do it. But before I left that room, I noticed that the mood was changing. And he looked at me in a different way, like if he wanted to guarantee that I wouldn't leave the room on that day without understanding an important message. He looked at me and said, whenever you look into the mirror and you see that you have red eye, rush to the hospital. Because with this disease, blindness is actually a possibility. And I think it was that moment, that final message, that made me want to master this, to take care of my disease, to not live in fear. So it actually changed me. I got into a research project, I would say, as an engineer that I am, and I started studying about the disease. And I realized that one of the things that can actually lead to that pain is, for example, stress and anxiety. That's why I'm in a stage, by the way. So I realized that there's a ton of inputs. You can see my slides, right? Okay, so trust me. There's a ton of inputs that can go to your system, to your body. And in your day-to-day, some of them will impact you, will affect you. In my case, many of those are actually stress and anxiety. And I kept looking at those, observing what was happening with me, and I got into practices like mindfulness, simplicity, yoga, and that type of stuff. But this is not a session about that, I promise. But I learned to observe my own body and to take actions to deal with it. And I realized that in my case, I have a warning sign that when things are going wrong, pain is coming, so I know that I'm doing too much, I'm going through a lot. But I realized that often that stress and anxiety was coming actually from the thing that I do for a living, building software. We basically navigate stress and anxiety every single day in our industry. Complexity is something that we have with us every single day. And things tend to get worse after a while. Eventually, we realize that our systems have a ton of inputs that are being problematic. And in our industry, we have some of them, like, for example, things like recurring bugs, meetings over meetings that no one understands why do we keep having that meeting, because we never reach any conclusion. Deadlines that no one cares, or we try to get there, but we are never capable of doing it because they are impossible. Or the worst of them is seeing your colleagues leaving the company after a while, not because the other offer was better, but because they knew that just a few more months and they would burn out. That is something that is actually happening in our industry. And I believe that the many things that I apply to my life to cope with a disease, and that I apply to my life to deal with this industry, can actually be beneficial to others. So that's why I'm here. Unfortunately, you can't teach simplicity as a recipe. You can't teach simplicity as a framework. We can't do that, okay? It's impossible. But there's one thing that we can do, is to tell a set of stories and a set of examples, and you can extract behavioral change from that. You can extract a couple of tips, a couple of ideas, and also attitudes that you can have in your day-to-day. That's exactly what I want to do here today with you. And I will start by going through 3 different pillars. So I organize my stories and ideas in 3 different pillars that are the ones that I use to master my own disease. So the first one is focus. So I focus on my body, I focus on observing the signals, I focus on trying to understand what really, really matters, okay, what's actually important. Then I proceeded to start subtracting those things that were actually doing more harm than good, okay, those things that were actually a problem. By the end, I observed what was important to me, I subtract some things, and I tried to master not only my disease, but the things that left. So I could find other things to extract joy from. My doctor forbade me to do 2 things that I love, I had to find another ones. So I got into this 3-pillar thing to simplify my life and to simplify the way that I work. And it's about those that I will talk today. But first we need to clarify something that is extremely important. Normally, when we talk about simplicity, we have this idea that simplicity and easy is the same thing, okay? Actually, it's not. So, simple and easy are 2 different things. So let's start with simple. Simple, if we look into the etymology of the word, we'll learn that is the opposite of complex. Complex is the idea of intertwined, something that is coupled together, okay? We know that concept quite well as well. Simple is exactly the opposite. It's something that feels like almost if it was transparent or clear, that we look at it and we understand, we can reason about it, we can easily explain it to someone. There's also a sense of quality on things that are simple, because you don't see so many moving pieces, so naturally it has this sense of quality and excellence. Easy is something completely different. Example. My daughter, she's 9 years old, and she plays the violin for a couple of years. Every single year, she starts going to some pieces that are a bit harder than the ones from the year before. So she struggles a bit, and eventually she masters those pieces. If I pick one of those today, and if I had someone here that could play the violin for a few years, those would be a piece of cake, okay? For her, they are still challenging. For me, they are impossible. I have no idea how to play the violin. So easy is this idea of familiarity, of something that is at hand, something that we know, that we are used to. Okay, that's the idea of easy. So they are 2 different things, and easy has this important detail that is extremely subjective. Okay? Because for me, for example, I'm Portuguese. Portuguese is my native language. For those that don't speak Portuguese, I bet that for you is extremely hard. For me, it's quite easy. Okay? The same thing with Danish, by the way, in the other way around. But this also doesn't mean that if something is simple, it will naturally be easy. No, that's not the point, okay? It's something different. So let's take as an example a cooking recipe. If I came here with a recipe with a set of ingredients, a set of steps that you need to take to go through them, by the end, what I would have is something that you can go through. But if one of those steps is actually a technique that is extremely hard, only seasoned chefs can master it, is it easy? No, it's not. But it's still simple. It's still just a cooking recipe. So one thing doesn't imply the other one, okay? It doesn't imply the other one. The other thing that is important is acknowledging the fact that in our industry, when we start building something, we tend to rely on the things that are at hand, those things that are easy, that we are familiar with. So, for example, we might grab at first languages that we know, the tools that we know, the databases that we know, and also those that nowadays feel trendy or that they feel like it will be easier to get to the final result. So we go through the process of doing that. So in the beginning, it's quite fast. We are speeding, we are delivering things. That's awesome. The problem is that we are delaying the difficult decisions for later. Those difficult decisions are something that you are subject to when you go through the simple path. When you try to do the things simple, you need to fight those decisions from the first day. You need to struggle, you need to fight, you need to take those decisions, you need to research, you need to take the chance of risking sometimes, even to get to the point of saying, we can't do it. That's why simple, at first, is harder. But eventually, it pays off, because you take the hard decisions when they appear. You don't go with the things that are familiar. Another example that I like to use to show the difference, and also to clarify another important idea, that is, sometimes there's complexity that will still be there. As I told you, I'm Portuguese. I learned English at school. As you can see, isn't perfect. I know it, and I have classes. So only recently, I finally realized that, for example, some words in English, a language that I always thought it was simple because it has a ton of rules and doesn't look as complex as other languages, as minor details like those, for example, if I pronounce exactly the same word with in two different ways, like record or record, they mean two different things. Okay? So even when a language that grows for many different years has this type of complexity, obviously software will have complexity as well. Okay? We need to deal with complexity. So it's part of our job. So what's the problem? The problem is this bias towards complexity that we are naturally inclined to. Okay? It's the way that we work, it's our industry. The problem is the fact that this bias often is appreciated. It's something that we celebrate. It's something that we put in our CVs as well. When we see a company doing some things that look advanced or they look complex, actually, we want to do the same thing. Okay? It looks fancy. It's the new things that are being done everywhere. We have FOMO. We have fear of missing the new trend, and eventually we go to a job interview and we can't get it because we don't master that technology. So our industry pushes everyone towards complexity by default. That's the problem. Obviously, we need to deal with complexity, and there will always be complexity there. Some of them is essential. There's another one that we usually call it the accidental one. The one that emerges during the process, okay? Naturally, we'll emerge some of those that we need to control it. But this is actually an onion, because there's one that is actually self-inflicted. The one that comes from the decisions that we take, by the fact that we try to go with the trends, by the fact that we try to do what is fancy at the moment, by the fact that we try to do the things in a given way just because. Okay? Obviously, we need to deal with complexity, but the secret is trying to avoid those two outer circles, especially the one in the middle. And why should we care? We should care because, according to a study from 2023, roughly 30% of the software development community has a diagnosed mental disorder. That means that inside of this conference, roughly 150 of us have a diagnosed mental disorder. And when they ask why, more often than not, the people under the survey, they mention the fact of dealing with complex systems and dealing with complex structures and having a complex day. A day full of things, a ton of expectations, many things going on, dealing with so many different problems and with so many different personalities. That's why we should care, for us and for those around us. And how do you do it? It all starts with focus. Why? Focus is the idea of knowing where we are heading to, is knowing the reason why we do what we do. A great example is actually WhatsApp. WhatsApp, at a given point, was supporting 900 million users with just 50 engineers. Just. because they focused. They realized what was the mission. They were so focused on the mission. They knew the reason why they exist, so they just focused on that. And we know for a fact that if we want to be reliable, like a communication system, an end-to-end communication system, we need simplicity. So they focused on that part, and they kept going, ignoring all the new things that were trending at the time. They didn't have the resources to do what they wanted to do with just 50 people. So they ignored many trends. They ignored the vertical videos from TikTok and social media type of applications for a long time because they didn't have the capacity to do that. So they focused on what mattered. They focused on why they exist, why that software is needed by the community. The problem is that we usually do the things the other way around. We usually do things the following way. We'll first find the problem, so we have what we need to solve, and then we think, this is a great use case for that technology that I saw last week at NDC Copenhagen. And then we try to retrofit a good explanation why we should be doing things that way. There's this idea of the golden circle by Simon Sinek that says that if you always start by the why, by the reason why you need to do something, and you go from the inner circle to the what, things will naturally become simpler. And you have a mission. You have something that is clear for those that are using it, and every single thing becomes easier to tell, to use, to control. A good example of that is actually Amazon. Amazon is well known by an obsession by the customer. Okay, they are well known by the customer service as well. And at a given point in 1997, Jeff Bezos challenged a group of engineers to try to address one problem that no one was doing it at the time. The idea was this thing of one-click shopping. That was novelty. It felt like impossible for the engineers at first. But Bezos was asking for it, so they went to the drawing board, they tried to do it. So eventually they came back to Bezos with one proposal that actually you could click one button to buy something. But then you would need to confirm your payment method and to select the delivery address. That sounds reasonable, right? You don't want to send things to the wrong place. You don't want to have problems with the payment method as well. And also, you don't want to take the risk that accidentally you will order something or a kid will click the button because it's funny, and then eventually you have 10,000 Lego sets at home, right? So they try to protect that because they have a great customer experience. So expect that everyone that is using Amazon is happy with it, and scenarios like those were not acceptable. But when they got back to Bezos and presented that, Bezos basically replied with one single question. What's the part of one click we don't understand? With just one challenging question, they got back to the drawing board, and eventually they managed to come up with this, that nowadays we can use it. And many companies adopted this pattern. Okay? It's something that you, at a given point, you had to license it to use it from Amazon. How is that possible? That's possible because they applied an important technique. They had the goal. Actually, they had the goal, but they also had an anti-goal. They had a clear reason of what they wanted to achieve, but also things that were not acceptable. So I challenge you that the next time that you and your team want to start the year and have this type of plans and you want to do this, that, and that you also come up with anti-goals. Why? Because in the day that you decide to reach, for example, 10,000 concurrent users, you don't have anyone wasting energy trying to do availability of 99.99. Because someone will infer that, will assume that you need to do that. But you can control that by also having anti-goals. Okay? This is one important technique. The other one is doing exactly what Bezos has done. Challenging questions. Is there a simple way to do this? Can we throw things away? Can we avoid doing things this way? What if we remove one of the screens? What if we remove one of the classes? What if we remove that technology or that technology? But also, in our day-to-day, we have another problem. The problem is that in the way that we work, we tend to assume that the things that we do today will be with us for 10, 20 years. We tend to assume that if we do something today, it needs to be with us forever. So we put a lot of effort at first to build a perfect solution. And we ignore the fact that sometimes it's better to have something ready after 2 weeks than after 6 months. If we start looking into the decisions and features and things like that as either one-way doors or either two-way doors, things start changing. One-way doors are those things that once we go through them, there's no turning back. Regulation, for example. Two-way doors are those things that, okay, let's do this, but we go to the other side of the door and we realize, this was not a good idea, no one cares about this feature. So let me step back and revert things, because otherwise I will have complexity in place that I need to maintain. If you ask that question to most things, you can start delivering things sooner and also test them. Because otherwise what will happen is that your software will be subject to erosion. That is the fact that something stays there, no one touches it, but it starts to degrade. With time, no one maintains it because no one cares about that part of the software, that feature, that module, that database, that whatever, and things start to become messy. They start to become the things that everyone calls legacy, for example. But you also can take advantage of erosion to simplify your software, because you can ask the question, why does this exist? And maybe, if it's subject to erosion, eventually it disappears. The same thing as with your backlog. Those things that have been there for 2 years, I bet you won't be doing them soon. Okay? It's not by the fact that you now have AI and you can do things faster that they are actually needed. So apply those principles and focus on what matters. Now, I would love to do a small experiment with you, quick challenge. You can see this Lego bridge, okay? Since we are in Denmark, I think it makes sense. And you can see it's sideways, okay? So the challenge that I have for you is to think and capture in your mind the first thing that will come to your mind for the following challenge. How would you level that bridge? According to the author of a book named Subtract, when he asked a ton of grown-ups, basically, how to do this exercise, most of them came up with the solution of adding one block to the shorter leg of the bridge. What if we remove the other one from the other one? But most of us, by nature, we believe that to solve something, we always have to add something. When we need to learn a new skill, it's something that we need to acquire, right? So when you need to solve a problem, we need a new tool, we need something new. So how is it possible that by extracting something from what it exists, it can actually solve a problem? So we are programmed this way, and he also concluded that if you run exactly the same experiment with kids, they will do exactly the other way around. They will first reach to the one that is bigger and remove one block. Actually, they are simplifying the structure. They remove the moving pieces. It's lighter as well. So the important lesson here is that subtraction is also a possibility. It's a great way to simplify once you focus on what matters and you know what is there and actually shouldn't be. Once you know what actually doesn't bring as much value. And also as a tool to avoid certain types of problems. So to apply subtraction is extremely important for many reasons, but one of them is that, for example, this is a study from Bain & Company, and they ran the study with CEOs of underperforming companies. So companies that were growing quite fast, but eventually they start underperforming. And according to them, 85% of those mention that the reason to underperform is not related to the market, is not related to AI, is not related to the clients, is not related to any of those. It's actually related to internal complexity. So the organizations actually know that. And why does that happen? Because once you start growing, eventually you start hiring more people, building more teams, creating more processes, more meetings to synchronize everyone, having committees, having policies, having governance, having even more tools in your day-to-day, you are always adding and adding and adding. And then you basically ignore the thing that took you there. That was basically a founder's mentality, the one that says we are doing our best for our clients and will be rewarded for that. And we'll do it in the most effective or efficient way that we can do it. So that's exactly what Steve Jobs has done. When Steve Jobs got back to Apple, at the time, Apple was in a bad shape, and the first thing that he decided to do was basically cut 70% of the product line. This is founder's mentality. He basically came up to a meeting and said, okay, ignore those 20-something products that we have, we just need 4. What they gain with that is focus, is applying the resources to the things that matter, is letting the people actually learn the products, because they had a huge problem that was often they didn't know from those 27 which one they should recommend to a client. Because now you are wasting a ton of effort for things that don't bring value. This is founder's mentality. This means having the capacity to avoid reaching to adding more and also relying to subtracting more. Everyone talks about the Pareto principle. If we talk about simplicity, we need to talk about it. But I want you to connect this to subtraction. Because if with the Pareto principle, we know that 80% of the effort only leads to 20% of the results. If you focus on that part of the effort, the 80%, and you start looking for things that actually don't matter, are not aligned with why do we do what we do, you have opportunities for subtraction. That's the idea. That's exactly what this company does. The name is X, not the X by Elon Musk, X by Google, actually. Google has this company, they call it X, or they call it also the Moonshot Factory. It's basically the unity that they have that is responsible for those projects that want to change the world, like self-driving cars. Since those projects are so expensive, what they do is that they basically have this different culture where they accept and also celebrate killing things. Okay? If we have a project that has a risk, if anyone reaches the conclusion that this might go wrong, they celebrate that and they kill the project. Because those projects are so expensive, they take so many years that no one wants to wait 6 years to finally realize that we can't do it. That is not sustainable. So if they do that, we can also do it. The difference is the culture. Because we have been building a culture that is exactly the opposite. Our industry celebrates the other thing, celebrates the idea of moving fast. We say things like, move fast and break things. No one is actually doing it. We are always trying to move fast, move fast, move fast. We have concepts like sprinting, but actually all of that is just draining us. We believe that by saying that every 2 weeks we have a sprint, we can always be sprinting. But no. Because when you are in such a velocity, when you are in such a rush, you don't have the time to actually take informed decisions. Under stress, under anxiety, your attention will narrow as well. Also, you don't realize all the details that are involved in the decision that you are taking. What if we tried in the other way around? What if we created this idea that, okay, it's fine to kill things, it's fine to simplify, it's fine to be a bit more calm, so we avoid dangerous mistakes. We avoid wasting time, wasting effort. That's the idea. Some might say that, okay, but that is lack of ambition. I don't think so. I think it's actually building things in a sustainable way. It's building things to actually have a good impact on others, not just to rush every single thing because we want to be the first. We want to be the best. Changing culture often starts with one single person. When I talk with friends, quite often they start complaining from their own companies, and they might say things like, yeah, but my company is like this or is like that. Everyone does things in this way or in that. So we are always using excuses to say, I can't change anything. But you can actually be the first one asking the hard questions. What can we avoid? Which project can we kill? Okay? How can we simplify? I know that sometimes that will lead to nothing, but at least asking the question can actually have an impact, can start changing the culture of the organization. Because once you start saying no to something, saying, I don't do this, I am not doing this anymore, you are actually finding the opportunity to do other things. Saying no is one of the most valuable skills, because otherwise you are saying yes to so many things that you don't have the time or the resources to say yes to other things, to the things that actually matter. So put the effort to be comfortable with saying no. Not only in your profession, but in your day-to-day life. If you know that something will drain you, something will become a problem, will consume all of your resources, why not? But if you want to start with something a bit more simpler, there's something for you. There's this concept of the spring cleaning, okay? Many families do it. And there's this other concept that we call the kipple. Kipple is all of those objects that tend to accumulate. They spread around, no one knows why, how they got into our desk, for example, and we ignore them for a long time. But eventually they are just waste and they are just blockers that we have in our way. In your software, in your agenda, in your processes, in your documents, everywhere in your day-to-day job, you have kipple. You have meetings that don't have value anymore. You have code that is not used anymore. You have scripts that were built once and no one uses them anymore. You have documentation that no one cares. You have so many things that are actually kipple. And doing this once in a while is the first step for simplification and for subtraction. If you do this, you will start doing the focus and the subtraction. So you know what matters, you know what to throw away, so you will win space to mastery. Mastery is one of the most important ones because we need also to be happy with what we do. We need to find some realization. We need to find a way that we actually like what we do. And also we need to go deep into the things that we do to also be able to simplify. A great example of this is a sushi chef from Japan. The name is Jiro Ono. Jiro is 100 years old. He still cooks every single day. He is a Michelin star chef. And if you ask him what's the secret, he will say it's actually simplicity. It's actually respecting the ingredients. It's not adding crazy flavors or strange techniques. It's knowing the basics, knowing the fundamentals, and do them well. Nowadays that we have been using AI for a while and we generate so much code, having this type of attitude with our profession is more important than ever, okay? Mastering the basics, the basic techniques, the fundamentals. And the other thing that he mentions is that his mission is to perfect his techniques. So one day, I hope he's already taking care of that. So one day he can deliver those teachings to other people. So one day someone can pick the thing that he learned and keep it going, keep improving. So mastering is also about teaching, is helping the others. And nowadays it's more important than ever because we see around and we see layoffs and things like that, and you see that often those that have less experience are the first ones to suffer with it. And we can help with that. We can be the ones sharing what we know, helping them to achieve something different. But in software, normally we do things in a different way. If I came here and I asked, what would you need to set up a company and support this load? 30 million users and 4 million images uploaded per day. Likely you would mention a team quite big or a given set of technologies like Kubernetes, AWS, DynamoDB, whatever. But this was actually the load of Instagram when Meta or Facebook bought them. But the most interesting part is that they had only a team of 13 people. But even more interesting than that is that only 6 of them were engineers. Sometimes we need to master what we do and avoid the new things so we can do this. And that's exactly what they have done, because what they have done is that basically they ignored the trending technologies. They picked boring technology that is simple, that they were specialists on that, and they took the best out of it. I honestly believe we should love boring technology For example, SQLite is the most used database in the world, and no one cares. Nginx has 20 years, is 20 years old or 21, and is widely used, and usually no one cares. So there's a ton of boring technology that we can use for amazing things. So if we put a bit of effort on them, we can actually master them. And instead of reaching for the new things, we can achieve the results that we look for with something simpler. That doesn't mean that you should ignore what Netflix is doing, okay? There's cases for that. The problem is when that complexity is actually too much for your problem. When you are just doing it because you are afraid that you don't have the opportunity to do the same thing. And one day you want to go to another company, or you want to do this and that. You want to seek for the, you want to explore your own curiosity, so you try to do exactly the same thing. This is our typical problem that leads to a ton of complexity. To a point that if nowadays you go to the cloud native landscape that they publish with all the different technologies from cloud native, you need to start scrolling. They even have a button to zoom in each one of those sections, and to a point that we are so happy on knowing the different technologies that they had the need to come up with a quiz that you can test your knowledge about all of those technologies. So this is crazy. But this is the culture that you have been building in this industry for such a long time. What if we try to do something different? What if instead of accepting to bring every single thing new, we said something like, okay, we have a cap. We have something like innovation tokens. Each member of my team has one token that can use each quarter. So each type of change has a budget. So you need to negotiate with your colleagues to find the things that actually are important. When you don't have tokens enough, you will start looking to your own technology to see, how can I do this in a different way? How can I use what I have to achieve the same result? That doesn't mean that this isn't a hard rule, but at least as an intellectual rule, something that you actually try to do, just to force you to explore the possibility of building with less, or controlling the things that you have and mastering those. We need to be more proud of the things that we have. For example, the famous monoliths, often ignored, often everyone doesn't like it. But for example, there's a project that is Basecamp by a guy named 37 Signals. They are so proud of their monolith that they call it a Majestic monolith. That doesn't mean that they ignored the fact that microservices have some good ideas. So nowadays what they do is that they have this concept of a citadel. So they went to the ideas of microservices, and they actually realized that this thing of building a specific server with a specific language for a specific task is actually a great idea. So they built small services around the big monolith, but they keep the big monolith in a modular way, in a way that they are actually proud of it. They keep investing in it, not only trying to extract things from it. Another example is actually SpaceX. SpaceX, when started, had a mission, and the mission was basically going to Mars. You know all of that, but one of the ideas was to build better rockets. But instead of going through the process of thinking, okay, what type of feature or what type of technology can I put on top of the existing rockets to make ours better, they went through the other way around. They basically went back to the basics, and they asked the value of every single thing. Instead of trying to optimize something that doesn't need to be optimized or shouldn't exist in the first place, they start going to the basics and questioning the value of everything. By the end, they simplified the process, they reduced the cost, they reached success. The same thing should happen with us. We should know that with principles, we'll go further than with frameworks. We know that. We have a proof of that nowadays, where frameworks, any AI model can do it. Principles, we are the ones thinking about them, trying to apply them. And by knowing the principles, we can quickly do whatever we want or guide the model to do what we want. A proof of that is something that happened some time ago when a group of professionals got together and they came up with 12 principles to guide the way that we build software. the Agile Manifesto. 12 principles, 12 good ideas. The problem is that we looked at it and we said, this would be better as a framework, as Scrum or something like that. So we come up with things that require committees or that require a ton of meetings, and we start ignoring the principles that were in the root of the reason that we use that thing. So you might know the ceremonies and the meetings, but you don't know the principles. And that often leads to problems, leads to people that aren't happy with those ceremonies, leads to people that don't see any value on every single day saying what they have done on the day before, just because the manager doesn't know, not because the rest of the team doesn't know. They actually know. This is the reason why 37 Signals decided to come up with this different way of running the Agile cycle. So basically, they learned with Agile, they learned with what was not working for them with the other ways of working, like Scrum and so on, and they come up with their own principles. They tested them, they validated, it worked for them, they perfected those principles, they published this as an open way that anyone can follow, but they don't force you to follow. They don't try to say that this is the best way. However, they are available to teach it, okay? Because they share the things as a document, as a book, that you can learn with it. Doesn't mean that you need to do it. Means that there's other ways of doing it if you start questioning the value of everything. If you ask why, if you focus on what matters, and you subtract the things that are there. And why should we care about this thing of simplifying? I honestly believe that when you simplify, you actually have a competitive advantage. For many reasons. One of them is the fact that actually your cost will decrease. In the long run, you have less things to maintain, right? Fewer components, fewer technologies, and you don't need as many people. Also, your speed eventually will start increasing. As we have seen, if we go with the easy way, it starts to decrease. If we go with the simple way, eventually the benefits will come back to us. But the most important of all, likely, is the burnout. The number of people that start to burning out and moving between companies is a huge problem. And nowadays, I would say that the problem is even bigger, because experience nowadays has actually a huge value. If you spend 2 years with someone inside of a company, mastering the domain of that company, learning the different ways of working, learning the different pieces of technology, those 2 years, when that person moves to another place, are just waste. But with simplicity, by avoiding all of that complexity that even the engineers say that they are burning out because of it, if you apply simplicity, you can control it. Does that mean that you are saying that things should be simplistic? Does that mean that we are saying that we can't be creative and build new things? No. There's actually a great story that I love that is by an Italian chef. The name is Massimo Bottura. Massimo is an Italian chef, a Michelin star chef. And there's a great story of that dish that, according to them, there's one day during the service, there was just one table that they had to serve the dessert. They asked for 2 lemon tarts, and they went back to the kitchen. They only had 2. So the sous chef picked those 2 and was about to plate those 2 tarts, and one of them went to the floor. In a Michelin star restaurant, I don't think it's acceptable to go back to the table and say, yeah, looks like we don't have it. So he was in panic, he was stressed, anxiety, narrow thinking. But Massimo, the chef, he looked at that thing on the floor and he saw beauty. He stayed calm. He saw possibilities, inspiration. And basically what he decided to do was to grab a new set of 2 plates and use the good one and try to represent the thing that he was seeing on the floor, on those 2. And on that day, he not only created this signature dish, he also created a great story. And the name of the dish is exactly that one. Oops, I dropped the lemon tart. So it's a great story about simplicity and creativity and innovation. But that can only happen when you are calm, when you see things through the simple lens, instead of every single thing being a problem. When you look at things and you accept that you have constraints, but those constraints can lead you to something different, to something better, to something new, they can spark your creativity. I couldn't finish this session without talking about one of the most important topics of our days, obviously, AI. Because some of you might be thinking, why should I care about simplicity if AI can pick a complex software and explain everything, or can do a ton of things for me, can even help me to navigate a complex world? Why should I care? Honestly, I believe that AI is just speeding up the process of building more and more complexity. Okay? Complexity is just growing up. With the velocity, with the number of things that we are building, with the number of things that we keep putting in our systems, with the expectations that we have, with the code that starts to be built in ways that sometimes we don't even know what they are doing, eventually it becomes a problem of complexity. And we are still the ones that are in charge. We are still the ones that are responsible. We are still the ones that know how to apply the principles. We are still the ones that can simplify. That's why it matters. That's why it's more important than ever. And how can you do it? 3 ways. Focus. Focus on why something exists. Focus on the reasons why you should do something. Focus on every single thing that is happening so you understand the inputs, the outputs, the problems that can emerge based on certain inputs. Accept that you can subtract. You can throw things away. Sometimes to solve a problem is better to avoid it at all, to throw things away, to say no, to extract one piece from the Lego bridge to simplify the solution. And by the end, you have fewer things that you can master, fewer things that you can learn, that you can perfect, that you can learn, and also influence this as a cycle, because now you can use your knowledge, your mastery, to complete the cycle, to focus again. This is exactly what I've done. I focused on myself to observe the signals. I learned about my disease. I started subtracting the things that I realized that they were causing me pain. And then I've done all of that because I mastered my own disease. I researched about it. I went deep on the minor details, and I explored, I tried different ways of dealing with it. 10 years ago, I was on that doctor's office, being told, you can't play football, you can't run, don't do it. 10 years after, I ran half marathon. How's that possible? I honestly believe that simplicity has this strange quality of making things that are hard possible. It's challenging, but eventually you get there. And that's exactly what I want you to take out of this session. I want you to go home starting to asking those questions. What can I simplify? Where should I focus? What can I subtract? What should I master? But don't do it because the code will become more elegant or more pretty. Do it so you earn the time to do your best work and live a better life. Thank you.